Welcome everybody to this event sponsored by the Corporation Society Initiative, CASI, here at Stanford Graduate School of Business. CASI is an initiative that's a collaboration between faculty, staff, and students built on some resources from the GSB and a lot of passion from those involved, including in particular our wonderful student leaders who do work helping us plan events, write the blurbs, and tell their friends about it, which helps us get engagement. We've been wanting to do an event on whistleblower for forever, since we started in 2018, and it's the first time. Please feel free to come in the front, is fine. Since 2018, students have wanted it. I've wanted it. I include a discussion of whistleblowing in my teaching here at GSB. And finally, we were able to get two individuals who can really take us into the world of speaking up. So let me just set it up by saying, what if you see something or experience something that you consider unfair, unjust, harmful, maybe illegal, at work or even in your personal life? What are your options? What might you do? What will you do? Especially if people with power don't want you to do anything about it. That's the dilemma that we're facing here, and that we want to delve into through the experiences of our two guests who encountered this situation, and they did do enough to make us aware of their efforts. And they are change agents. We had an event here on choosing leadership, and leadership is about changing and improving the world. So that's what we want to delve into here. Eric Ben-Artzi, sitting here, has multiple degrees, including a PhD in mathematics from NYU. The doctor is from NYU. He works as a risk manager in Goldman Sachs and in Deutsche Bank most recently, in terms of big financial institutions. And he gave a tip to the Securities and Exchange Commission about a very large accounting fraud in Deutsche Bank around 2011. I mean, the fraud goes before that, but that's when he informed them, which ultimately led to some news coverage, and it led to a fine of $55 million in 2015. Ellen Pao has engineering degrees from Princeton, a JD, and then an MBA, split up with 2 years of being a corporate attorney in between the JD and the PhD. After which she worked in many different positions in Silicon Valley, including in particular the 7 years that she spent, 7.5 years in Kleiner Perkins, whom she sued for gender discrimination, for retaliation, other claims about her employment there. She became an icon for doing so. It was a couple of years before the sort of known Me Too around Weinstein, et cetera, that came in 2017. The framework for both of these is sort of the early, 2010s to 15, both of the cases. So a decade more ago, they concluded in terms of the legal parts of it. And Ellen proceeded. The trial was a jury trial, and she would not settle the case such that she also could write a book about it in 2017. And we have some copies of this book called Reset. She has a nonprofit now called Project Include. Eric Ben-Artzi is an entrepreneur and a consultant. And that's our panelists for today. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and I'm going to turn it to the audience. We have to be kind of out of here about 12:50, so we're going to have to compact this event. So first of all, let's start with the two of you the very different issues. One was gender discrimination culture in tech companies. The other is accounting fraud in a financial institution. But there are questions I can ask both of them, and they will give us their perspective. And it's so remarkable how similar many of the lessons are, even though the stories are so different. So, asking both of you, we'll go this way, and then we'll go back and forth. How's your experience? What was your experience of diagnosing the problem and the process of understanding what's wrong and most need of change? You want to start?
Sure. So it started sort of very small and very technical. As a risk officer, and this was immediately after the financial crisis. So obviously there was heightened attention to this, and I was sort of at ground zero. I was at Goldman when the crisis happened on the trading desk. So I was very, very acutely aware of the issues involved, of the sort of the particular credit derivatives that were involved. So it started as a technical matter. I complained internally. I then went to authorities, to the SEC, to other authorities, also in Germany and the UK, within the US, and sort of followed all the steps that were prescribed by the law, by Dodd-Frank and Sarbanes-Oxley. So there's extensive and very good protections in the law for whistleblowers and for reporting this type of for protecting investors, really, in the US especially. And I think so when we talk about how did they discover the issues, which issues? The financial issues, that was resolved relatively quickly. But the real issue that I discovered later on, and I don't know if Ellen has faced something similar, but I discovered that the real problem wasn't Wall Street, wasn't the financial issues, wasn't the accounting in this case. The real issue was much deeper, was really the legal system. And so that became the issue in the later years. It didn't actually end in 2015. It ended only years later. But I had a sort of a tour of the U.S. legal system that started, fortunately for me, only the civil legal system. I never had to do any dealing with the criminal justice, but within the civil legal system, encountering sort of the conflicts of interest and the misaligned incentives of the various officers of the court, and the results. So I think that's become for me the issue that I'm to this day, and not just to this day, also going forward, if I could, the one issue that I think needs to change is that.
And your experience was more in the private law litigation and on topic that is, known to some people, but sometimes at the time that you sued, not discussed. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in diagnosis?
It's similar to Eric, where it's like small things that start cropping up and you're wondering how to process them. Mine were more on my performance review. So I'd have one comment that said, oh, you don't speak up enough, you're too quiet. Another one would be, you're too aggressive, your elbows are too pointy, you talk too much. And how do you kind of bring it all together? How do you, I'd say, like, give me specific examples. Like, I want to improve. What am I doing wrong? And they couldn't come up with any. So you kind of start adding that up, and then you start looking around, and it's like, okay, if we have a conference and it's 2 rows of tables, but all of the women are in the back row and all of the men are in the front row, you kind of wonder what's going on there. And then there's a ski trip and only men were invited, and the reason was, and it's with CEOs and it's with other folks that are important to build relationships with, and it's because women kill the buzz, right? So you start hearing more and more of this, but the biggest indicator was when they raised Fund 15, and almost all of the men were promoted into the fund as partners and none of the women. So then it's like, well, this isn't just me having pointy elbows or being too quiet or not doing the right thing. This is a very systemic problem. And there were other examples that the woman had experienced that kind of showed a much bigger pattern. And but people wouldn't listen. It was also a systemic issue where this is what was happening in all of venture capital. Nobody had ever taken these issues public. So there was actually a New York Times reporter. I think your class read the article, a different article, but he interviewed somebody who had written a book on Silicon Valley, and that author said, I haven't heard about it, so I'm skeptical. And it's just, well, why would anybody speak up about this? Because this is a response. So and then the legal system, like we've talked about, it's very stacked in favor of the institutions that are repeat players and that have all the funds. And the plaintiff firms are struggling and they don't have the resources. We were not able to get live transcripts for the trial. We had to wait until they were cheaper, much later. And it was just like ongoing disadvantages throughout all of these different areas.
Yeah. So looking at it now, 10 more years later, the sort of key events, what would you say is your theory of change, or the way, most people take painful experiences or observations like this and don't, process them, and don't necessarily, go as much public or try to do as much about it as you in different ways have tried to do. So you, Ellen, has a nonprofit that you started. So talk about that, or about kind of how you go about addressing these issues.
I think like my theory of change is that like people talking about it makes a huge difference. So it's not necessarily like my one action is going to change a lot of people's minds, but it does get people to, not everybody is going to sue, but, I'd have people come up to me. One engineer from a tech company who was a white man said to me, I didn't know about any of this, but then my office mate, my coworker, came and told me she had had these terrible experiences. She'd been harassed. She'd been turned, bypassed for different opportunities, and that really impacted him. So the people telling their personal stories, people that you trust, somebody told me about his mom being moved into a broom closet of an office when she was promoted at her university, and that story about them trying to move me to an office in another building resonated with him. So these small touch points can make a difference. So people just telling their experiences to other people, not necessarily, they won't necessarily have the same opportunities and privilege to actually sue and litigate. And it's a hard road, as you know, Eric. But I think that causes a lot of change. And then just giving people information. So Project Include is focused on, if you are actually interested in creating a diverse and inclusive startup, here are all of the ways and resources that you should be thinking about and that you should be considering as you run your company. So just giving people the information and hoping that, understanding that there are good people out there who want to do the right thing and just need a little bit of help.
So you're trying to find good people and persuade them and give them tools to make a change in their own environment, especially small to medium startups.
Yeah.
Eric seems to have a slightly different take.
So I think, for many years I just was pursuing my own case and then went back to sort of being in fintech and consulting. This is really, for me, I'm a little bit behind Ellen in terms of actually taking initiative on what I analyze as the problem. But in a sense, it's not so much speaking to the better angels of our, of our conscience in terms of how we act on a day-to-day basis, as much as how we would resolve our disputes and conflicts. I think that my diagnosis of the real problem is that when we resolve disputes, whether it's employer-employee, whether it's accounting issues, whether it's marital issues for co-founders, we end up going to the legal system where the incentive structure is one that is misaligned with the interests of both the partnership, the people who go there, and also the law. So I think the initiative that I'm embarking on really right now these days is to try and change at a sort of individual level. Something that every one of us, everyone in this room and watching this can do is change how we actually enter into contracts with other people, whether it's written or unwritten, in a way that guarantees that if and when we run into a dispute, we would resolve it fairly. So we're not committing to being angels. We're not committing to never breaking any promises or always being a good person necessarily. But if we do, we're going to be fair to each other, and we're going to resolve it in a way which doesn't use the kind of unfair advantage that I think both Ellen and I encountered when we got into the legal system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so your focus is more on legal system. Your focus is more on, people's goodwill to be inclusive on the specific issue that you had. So, from awareness to power, do you think that, for example, what role do media play or other players in that? In particular, both of you have had encounters with the media. So I want you to reflect on your encounters with the media, with the law, a little bit more detail.
Well, the media is sort of, it's kind of like a tiger. You ride it, and sometimes it works in your favor, and then it might eat you. And in my case, it was very instrumental. I formed a personal relationship with reporters who really helped bring the case to light and force the regulators who were very conflicted, revolved in and out of the bank, and were personally invested in not doing anything, as in completely incentivized to bury the case. And thanks to the media, that didn't happen. But on the other hand, when I approached the media later, I really got burnt. So I wouldn't necessarily advise anybody who gets into this kind of situation. You have to realize that the media is also full of incentives. Sometimes they're the right ones. Sometimes they just want to do something more sensationalist, or they need to get clickbait, etc., which may not be in your favor.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think also, again, you have the imbalance where for my trial, there were 4 PR representatives from Kleiner Perkins in the courtroom every day working the press. And I didn't have the resources, but also my lawyers were like, we're not allowed to talk to the press. We have to keep this, this trial and the jury unaffected by our actions. So they were constantly pushing their narrative and constantly trying to shoehorn reporters into and kind of bullying them into covering the trial in a way that was favorable to them. I heard from different reporters about some of the tactics they used, and it was quite, it was bullying. But it was interesting because some of the reporters were women who had had similar experiences, and those experiences resonated, and they would try to educate the male reporters who were in that room. And it kind of, over time, hearing all of the stories and the experiences that I had had kind of changed the coverage over. But it was like a hard process, and it was still very unfair because they just had these 4 people who were paid, must have been millions of dollars every day. It was like a 5-week trial, and there were 4 of them just working the press. So it is hard. And then as a reporter, you also want to think about long-term coverage. So I'm suing once, and so they tell my side of the story, and I'm favorable to them, and I bring them other stories, but I don't have that many other stories to tell them. But if you're a big firm like Kleiner Perkins, you can give access to your portfolio companies. They work with Google, they invested in Amazon, they have a lot of startups that are up and coming that people want to get access to. There was one reporter who wrote a terrible story about me, who one of my friends met with separately, and that reporter said, look, I'm thinking the long game. I'm trying to get an in-house corporate job. This reporting gig is not something I want to do forever. So so that is how I think about my coverage. Who's a repeat player and where can they take me? And that's how, that's where my bread is buttered.
Okay, I want to go not too long from now to questions, because we have a lot of good people. We also have people online, so welcome to you too. So I want to go to what each one of us can do. Everybody in the audience, you might be, we're educating leaders, and you'll be in leadership position maybe, but all of us in some parts of our lives are not necessarily in, leadership position, at least not right away. what do you think are the most meaningful actions that people can take, to make change, to prevent harms, to create more accountability and balance power?
So I think, there are some things we can't change. So we can't change how, top lawyers from the administration revolve into, investment banks, into law firms, and then, prosecute or do not prosecute or reach sweetheart settlements. I'm sure everybody's aware of the, stories that keep coming out of that type of thing. We can't change that, at least not immediately. That would require massive political change. But we, as I mentioned earlier, I think we can do things in our immediate, in our dealings with the immediate, with the people that we get into relationships with. And so I think I would recommend, and this is part of the initiative that I intend to take, but we start with a pledge of saying that we will always resolve our differences fairly. And that translates into something very concrete. So if you're starting up a company and your founder's agreement, you might have something about how you'd resolve disputes, and maybe you make collaborative law. For those of you who don't know, I encourage you to go look it up later into that, to make sure that there's not an incentive for any side to go and treat the other one unfairly when push comes to shove. Same thing goes for your personal relationships and et cetera, et cetera. So I think maybe similar, I'm not sure, how much success Ellen has with CEOs, but I would even say that if you're hiring people and now you have more power, and maybe you're already in a position where you can affect not just, one or two people around you, but maybe dozens of people under you, then maybe you bake that into the employment contracts, that they're going to be fair and you're not going to, crush and run over your employees, et cetera. So I think that's how that's the change that I think each of us can make, and it's something that I certainly intend to pursue sort of as an initiative.
Yeah, and I agree with Erica, but I also want to take it kind of up a level, and I think, it's hard. You're in business school, you're thinking about, short-term future, but when you get towards the back end of your career, you start thinking about, like, what value have I added to the world? What have I done? I want to leave the world a better place with me having been in it than not. And do I want to be the one who poisoned kids with social media? Do I want to be the one who, took that opportunity and got rid of revenge porn, which is what we did at Reddit. We, everybody had revenge porn. It was completely okay on all the platforms, and we decided we're going to get rid of it. And it wasn't super popular, but we got rid of unauthorized nude photos, and that changed every single company, and now it's not allowed on almost all the major platforms, and that followed Reddit taking that stance. So, how do you think about your opportunities? I sleep well at night, except when I'm worrying about my daughter, but she's a teenager. So, but like for work-wise, I'm like, I did the best I could. I did the right thing. I thought about all of the different players that I'm responsible for. I thought about my users. I thought about society. I thought about my employees, and I took care of them the best I could. And I wasn't out there doing things that I'm going to regret in 10 years, and I'm going to leave the world saying, God, I poisoned all these people. I allowed people to steal money from the government. I think, Eric, like you can say I did the right thing in my career, and maybe it's not the most popular thing, and maybe it's not the one that generated the most income for me personally, but I'm telling you, a lot of those people who are billionaires and very wealthy, they're not happy people. Like, they don't sleep well. I think they're like always trying to get more money or more power, and that's a very hard way to live.
Yeah, I was going to actually pick up with you a little bit more, Ellen, but anybody can opine on the social media. So I didn't mention in the bio, she did serve as she worked 2.5 years for Reddit, including a stint as an interim CEO. And it was tumultuous, it was eventful, including the steps to take down content, which of course is a highly contentious area today. So as things evolved, we seem to have some setbacks also on the gender issues online. AI-generated sexualized material, videos, etc. And you've written op-eds and other things about social media. Any observation.
I think
Free
we're going to
speech.
look back, and like now when I tell people, oh, revenge porn and unauthorized nude photos, it was allowed. Like a lot of the younger generation are horrified and shocked. Like what kind of world allowed you to take, nude photos that, somebody else took and stole from you and put them all over the internet? Well, that was the world we lived in. And I think when we look back and we say, oh, you were allowed to generate porn of somebody through AI and you're allowed to spread it and share it all over the internet, people are going to be horrified again. I think it's just like, it's just very slow to catch up because you have these people who want to make a ton of money. And that greed is driving so many bad decisions. And now the government is kind of following it and not regulating the way it should. We're at some point, the world is going to catch up and figure it out. We see different pockets where, California has some rules, Europe has some better privacy rules, but we're going to realize this is causing tremendous harm to especially our children. It's causing harm to our ability to trust in communities. It's causing harm to society in general. And that eventually, as an optimist, I'm hopeful that that will change at some point. But right now, you look at it and it's, I try not to let my daughter on social media. I'm not on social media anymore. I was pretty active before because it's a lot of it is fake. I'd say half of the posts when I was at Reddit, half of the posts that were very popular were fake posts. And now with AI, I think it's going to be more. So just trying to understand, like, what are you actually doing? What are you being pushed to do? What bad patterns are you making? Like now we've got all sorts of regulation around kids having phones. Schools are banning them. Like we're slowly catching up, but it's kind of like tobacco where you've got something very toxic. People kind of recognize it. And then all of a sudden, eventually it gets regulated. And that's what's going to happen with social media. So you should be aware and try to protect yourself and your and the kids in your circles, because it's something that we're realizing is not good and it's not real, and parts of it are good, but you have to really manage it.
Can I comment?
So I don't have that kind of my experience with social media is very limited, but I do see that again from my perspective, which has a lot to, is very focused on both incentives and how rules get enforced. If I think of Airbnb or some of the other platforms as that's also a form of social media, right? It connects me. It allows me to to visit my son in college and rent an apartment from someone. I know that it's regulated by a company that has the right incentives to make sure that I behave well as a guest, and the owner provides me with the service that I expect. So I see that as sort of to me that's an optimistic direction that I think a lot of other platforms could take in a way that is maybe less not so much dependent on goodwill, but really just on sort of financial incentives. And so I think we should. I would hope that we would have more social media that is in which the financial incentives are more aligned with our interests.
But then, just to say that a lot of the algorithms and other things that make it toxic are very invisible and very hard to get your arms around. So the opacity again is kind of part of the problem, and the incentives then get distorted without anybody being able to change them.
Right.
So that's that. Okay. I think we should go for questions and more engagement with the audience. Go ahead.
Yeah. What would you do differently in the way you spoke up? Because I'm sure you learned from your experience. What would be a better way to do it next time? Both of you. Yeah.
I think I would have used the media more, like really getting my narrative out there ahead of them, calling me a poor performer and saying that I was a bad worker. Like it took so long for the press to come around that if I could have gotten ahead of that a little bit earlier, that may have changed the outcome of the trial. So I think that piece I was not very sophisticated around at that point.
I think it depends on how you kind of which perspective you view it. From my own sort of well-being, I should have actually done the opposite, used the media less. Even though the media was very, very favorable early on, it sort of complicated things in terms of the entire process. So I should have, so for my own personal interest, it would have been to be more quiet and less on the media. That's my take on that. In terms of making change, I don't think the media made much of a difference. I think it took a pretty superficial view, in my opinion. So, for instance, some of the change that came about, I don't know, maybe thanks to my activism, media-wise, was that there were some clawbacks from top Deutsche Bank executives, and generally in regulation-wise, there were, there's more skin in the game, so to speak, more clawbacks in the financial system, but that didn't really fix anything. In terms of the incentives of the overall enforcement mechanisms and how we're governed, there's still, there has been no change there.
Of course.
Ellen, you touched on the inequity in litigation of wire transfers. 95% of what's being invested in AI and legal tech is being invested to make corporations stronger, not the victims of corporations stronger. So, and I have an initiative called Justice for All that we can talk about that would try to rebalance that. But to both of your points, the idea that the court system is fair, Eric, is naive. I'm a wild gotcha lawyer. It's unfair. So where would you take that? And also, I would think it is unfair. So where would you find a third fora that you could know is fair, that would understand that the law was written by lobbyists and would figure it out? How would you do that?
I don't have a good answer for that, because I agree with you. The whole trial was so unfair. They had so many resources. They had, I think they had like 24 people on some of the emails. They had teams of people going through all my email, and I sent them everything because I didn't have the resources to limit, and they sent me like a small piddling of emails. I had to ask for specific search terms. It was very hard, but I think that was the best option that I had. There are no other clear options, and I think hopefully, some of Eric's work takes hold. But the system, it's very brittle. It's very lined up for the repeat player. The plaintiff lawyers don't have resources. They're really investing in the outcome of your case. So if they can get you to settle, especially in these huge, expensive class action suits, they will push you in that direction hard, even if maybe your personal interests are different.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm very glad that you're taking that initiative. I'd like to speak to you more in depth. I think I'll give you an example of what I think, it's maybe more concrete than what I've said before, of what you can do. So obviously we can't change on our own, change the court system, but one thing that I've done in contracts that I've signed with partners is to make sure that is to have a paragraph that says that if we enter dispute, then we cannot hire separate lawyers, but we have to make a fund that both sides have get half for their lawyers. So right away, change the game theoretic, the prisoner's dilemma, where each side it becomes an arms race. Each one hires a worse lawyer, more expensive, and the only winners there are basically the court insiders. This changes the system because you can no longer gain an advantage by throwing more money at the problem. You can also, it makes it harder to use contingency to do that. So it's obviously it's a very, very limited solution just for, it's not going to solve the whole problem. But I think in a world where more people become aware of this issue, if you have a big enough network, and this goes back to the social network issues, then eventually you can create, maybe something that is almost, an insulated bubble, sort of a virtual machine on top of the legal system, which would be more fair, even though you haven't changed the underlying legal system.
You shared the language of that provision. Good provision.
Yeah, it was actually approved by a court. So I see it as a sort of an innovation.
Go ahead.
One question I had is, I hear often, I'm a senior undergrad, I hear often about this idea of, I want to be like at the table where decisions are made, and I'm a good person, so I will make better decisions than are currently being made at the same table. And I guess I'm curious because I often see if someone speaks out about something, then they leave. They leave the table. And stuff happens, and maybe they can hold the people who continue to be at the table accountable to some extent. But have you guys observed interactions at the table where someone proposes something that is ethically very dubious, and someone at that table is like, I don't think so, and it gets walked back? Or does that not really happen?
Everybody's looking at Ellen.
Yeah.
We had one where there was a company that we wanted to invest in, and I thought the way we were doing it didn't make sense. So when I joined Kleiner, it was very much about like, we're going to change the world. We're going to build these companies that are going to make a difference. And we're looking at one company where we're like, this company is like kind of shaky, but they're going to go public and we can just make our money and get out. And I said, hey, that's not what you've been telling me. So I'm kind of curious what's going on here. And we ended up not investing in that company. And so it does happen, but it's very rare. Like then, you know, it is a hard thing to do. And I think like when you get to that table, sometimes you're just hanging on to the seat. So it is very hard to speak up. And sometimes people aren't even listening to you because you're token. So you're there and they don't want you to speak up, and they don't want you to turn the conversation another way, because you should feel, one of the people said, you should feel lucky that you're even here. Like, how dare you ask for more? Like, you are, you know, for you to speak up, you know, and they call it complaining, like, you don't know your place, right? You are lucky to be here and you should just shut up. So it's a hard thing to do, but also sometimes like you know, you have to be careful how you do it, but you can make a difference. And it's, and over time you build that up if you're in the right environment, but it is hard. And I've seen areas, like I've read about, you know, the White House under Obama, where the women weren't listened to. There's a great article in the New York Times that talked about how they would support each other. So, you know, Valerie Jarrett would hear something that one of the other women would say, and she would repeat it. Or if somebody else took credit for that idea, she would go back and say, no, that was, you know, that was her idea originally. Or, you know, so there are ways to kind of band together, but it is hard. I feel like it's getting harder, to your point earlier. Yeah, it's getting harder. So you have to find a good environment if you can, and then, or create your own environment, and also be thoughtful about, you know, sometimes you can be in a bad environment, but you have a good manager, or you're in a good part of that company where you do have more of a voice and you do have more influence. And yeah, but it's hard. It is hard.
Building on what you said, Ellen, when you find yourself in these spaces and talking to people who have directly benefited from unjust systems and unethical systems, how do you have the conversation with those people, or what are the kinds of things that you say to help them recognize that these systems are unjust, even though they've been beneficiaries of them, and encourage them to change these systems, right? Because if it's like, if I believe that, you know, I live in a meritocracy and I'm here because I'm smart, and you come to me and say, no, the system that created you or the system that got you here is a bad system, that's often a very challenging thing for people who are beneficiaries to accept.
So we tried to have that conversation at Kleiner, where, you know, one woman was livid that the women were all in that back row at that one offsite. And, you know, I think I helped her speak up to one of the managing partners, and his response was, well, you should get all the women together to talk about this. And I was like, that is preaching to the choir. Like, we are not the problem, and that's not going to get us anywhere. And then I sued because I didn't think they were able to hear it. They could not process what was going on to other people within the organization. And I know at the beginning of the lawsuit, they didn't hear it either. I mean, they were so angry, like I had stepped out of line, I should be grateful, and how dare I, kind of bring up these things that were not problematic. But once the press kind of turned and started writing about how, hey, how can you have a ski trip where it's only men and women kill the buzz? Like, that doesn't make sense. And all of these things started to have a different context, and they were out of that kind of kind of silo where everybody thought it was okay to do all of these things, and that venture capital silo is quite strong. I think that kind of changed the understanding of what was allowed and what was not allowed. Maybe they didn't agree with it, but they knew it was not something that others were on their side on.
Hi. As a person who's worked in the media organizations that covered your trial, the internal in the media organizations are similar structures, right? So you're battling things within there. One question I had for you, because having gone through it over time, made a report, tried to assemble colleagues to back each other up along processes, is there anybody that you see right now that has built an internal scaffolding for their organization that actually helps individuals or groups of people sort of address things in real time and with real vigor?
I just, I thought maybe these ombuds people would be helpful, but then in talking to somebody who was working at an investment bank, I brought in an ombuds. They're like, no, the ombuds is paid by the company, and it just doesn't work. So I think it's like you need the CEO who's actually going to do the right thing, and that person hires the right HR person and the right lawyer, and also you need a CEO who's willing to kind of say, like, I know maybe that's the safest legal thing for me to do, but I'm going to make a business call here and do something different. So it's really dependent on the CEO. And I feel like at Reddit, I had a good team. We had some kind of we had some harassment issues. And what we did was we had, then we did a big rundown of everybody tell us all the bad things that had happened to you. We had this culture where it was very loosey-goosey, and some of the managers were saying inappropriate things, and that created a culture where everybody was saying inappropriate things. So we're not going to fire everybody, but we are going to do a bunch of training. We're going to tell you what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and you are on notice, right? So we did end up firing somebody. Well, it was kind of a small team, so there weren't that many people involved. And then we checked in again 6 months later, are these problems solved? How, and with the people who were experiencing the issues. But it's I had a very strong team who was willing to do that, and an HR person who was trusted, who could get the information. And it was something that I felt was important. But that's not how most companies work, and that's not how most HR people work. She was out of school and hired by my predecessor to be innovative. And so my HR person was great. She left HR. She's now working in psychology, so it didn't last for her. But it's hard. The systems don't, most companies are they want to protect their legal risk. So they do everything, and the people leave, but they get pushed out. They don't leave, they get pushed out. I got fired.
Yeah, Eric was in a very large organization. There, you're going to have layers and layers of people.
Yeah,
you're encountering not the CEO, remember the CEO.
Yeah, it's I think my experience with that it comes down to the fact that senior management wants things to be that way, because obviously they're strongly incentivized.
Yeah,
and so that's not going to change, and the whole structure is very rigid.
Rick.
Thanks for coming. So I'm a lecturer here at GSB. In the context, about 5 years ago, I was branded by the press as a finance industry whistleblower. And I would say about 5 years on, pretty much all the arguments I made, the markets, fund returns, academic papers, everything followed exactly what I said. And I'm in industry exile teaching at Stanford now with a NOG, which is great. But all the people I was pointing the finger at are still at Davos. I guess my question is, when I was growing up, I would have believed that you could go out and say the right thing and everyone would agree, and then something would happen. We live today at a time when the Epstein files are in everyone's face. There's bipartisan fingerprints on it, and this is the only country where no one has actually been held accountable. Right? Peter Mendelsohn was arrested today. So the question I have to, can we actually tell people, like, as the world changed to a point where we look now, we say power is exercising itself in extreme ways, and the incentive to speak up is not really what it was, because even if you're proven right, power will just squash it.
Do you want to start or me?
I always have the same answer, so maybe if
It's a hard question because it's getting, like, you feel like that incentive is getting more and more unbalanced now. But I feel like I've helped people. Like, I feel like there are people who have come to me and have said, like, I had this horrible experience and I didn't even tell my husband. And it's something I felt so much shame about, and that I always felt like it was my fault. And having you tell your story, and now all of these other people telling their stories, has made a difference, right? So the system is really hard to change, but you can make a difference. And before, like, I'm a researcher, I'm like very information driven. So before I sued, I talked to so many people, and I talked to a few women who had sued their investment banks, and some of them won and some of them didn't. And their advice was like, they say, we tell everyone, don't do it. Like, don't do it. The experience is terrible. You're going to get fired. They're going to go through all your personal background. They're going to, one woman had helicopters flying over her house a lot of the time. And, you're going to be tailed. You're going to have all your relationships kind of poured over. And when I asked her, but do you regret it? She said, no. None of them regretted it. Like, so there was something that they got out of it, even if it wasn't the public recognition or the monetary benefit or the kind of, it was a career setback. For me, it's like I sleep at night, right? Like, I would always wonder, well, what if I'd done something? You hear all these other stories about what's happening to people, and I hear a lot of them because people want to come to me for advice. And it's terrible. Like, the stuff that's happening out there is terrible. And if I feel like, oh, I allowed it because I just kept my mouth shut like everybody else in the system, I would not feel good about that. So I feel like, okay, I've tried to make a difference, and maybe it didn't work now, but now I've got like a room full of people at Stanford Business School listening, and hopefully like that will make a little change in somebody, and maybe that seed will make a change in somebody else, and those two seeds together can kind of cause some kind of, now I'm mixing metaphors, but like a ripple effect. I believe very strongly in the ripple effect. Like, you plant an idea and it grows, and you hope that you can, right now the ideas are like very much on one side, but if you can keep trying to move the Overton window and give people understanding of like, it's unbalanced, but your values are not necessarily part of that, right? You have to decide what's right for you and what kind of change you want to leave in the world. And hopefully enough people do that eventually, and just hold on to, like, I know this is wrong. Maybe I'm not going to speak up about it, but at least I know it's wrong, right?
You want to comment? You have different answers of you over the years in terms of.
Yeah, things are going to change only when there's, at the level of, enforcement of the law is only going to change when the incentives for the people enforcing the law are going to change. And that's only going to happen when enough people, and this, by the way, is not unique to the US. It's, I think, pretty much, maybe with the exception of a couple of countries, it's everywhere. The enforcement of the law is not really separated from powerful people. And so you have, there's academic papers going forever back, I think Galanter in the 1970s, about how the advantage of the repeat players are usually either the bad actors or the powerful law firms, both of which benefit from breaking the law. And so it becomes a situation where it really pays to break the law, and if you don't, you're not going to get ahead, you're not going to move up. And so, that Epstein effect, the reason why you have so many bad actors moving up is because they promote each other, and it pays. And if you don't do that, you don't get there. And the only way to change that is if there's demand to change the incentive system within the legal system. I don't think there's enough, there's hardly any awareness of that. It's surprising to me.
Then it's back to awareness and what we discuss. Well, we hope we raised Do we have time for one more question here? Okay, one more question.
I'm Joe. I'm a grad student here. Thanks so much for this presentation. I was curious if you could talk about the effects that ongoing media fragmentation and political polarization will have on whistleblowing. On the media fragmentation, I think we all recognize that's easier than ever for somebody to take to Twitter or TikTok or whatever it may be and express their point of view, but also it doesn't carry the same authority that it necessarily did before if you went through a vetted, established, and just one of a few media outlets. And then overlapping with that is, I think, the topic of political polarization, because I think whether it's fair or not, the perception is oftentimes that whistleblowers are these progressive activists that are inside these more conservative organizations. And with media ecosystems increasingly being along political lines too, I think it's really easy for a particular complaint to basically be written off by an entire political side and to just have sort of rally around the flag phenomenon. So could you comment on how you see both of those impacting whistleblowers?
Yeah, no, I think basically it's not just whistleblowers, it's finding out what the truth is. On the one hand, yeah, there's freedom to, a lot of facts come out, but then also a lot of lies come out, a lot of garbage, and then it becomes not a full-time job, it becomes an impossible job to actually realize what's real and what isn't. So I think for whistleblowers, for me, the only reason things that I was vindicated, that there was eventually a fine, that there was an award given in my case, so I'm one of the few whistleblowers who were supposedly successful, was because there was sort of the gold stamp of the Financial Times initially for my story. Now, once that gold stamp disappears and, there's just a bunch of
Social media.
Media that's out there, and the polarization, of course, makes it harder. Like in my case, my political leanings are not at all, are more complex than just, progressive. And I believe in free markets, for example. And it wasn't as somebody who opposes markets who did that. It's quite the opposite, actually. Yeah, I think, so I think but still, I can see how the political landscape is such that everybody now, if one person that you trust or followers on your side team goes against that, then everybody else does and believes that it's a lie. So yeah, I think it's going to be a lot harder.
I think the other part that's making it much harder is the harassment that you get from social media and in real life based on the information that's kind of floating out there and the negative narratives against you. And that makes it much harder for people to speak up. People are much less likely to speak up. And I think once you speak up, maybe you shut up because your family is at risk. Your safety is at risk, and it becomes much harder. So it's a hard time. At some point they need to regulate harassment, but it's not happening, and it makes it much harder. I think, I think it's becoming now, though, like the right is getting harassed too. So I'm hopeful that at some point it's enough that they really try to take hold of this.
There's enough cruelty that we decide maybe not to be cruel. That's the hope we can send from here. Thank you so much all for coming and engaging in this program.